is such thing as hate speech. To say there isn't is, quite frankly, moronic. The debate is not whether there is such thing or there isn't, but whether hate speech should or shouldn't be criminalized. Now, to put any doubt of that to rest, let's just have a look at the following examples. You might say that all of these sentences are hateful, and I would agree with you. I think all of them could be considered hateful speech. Probably the worst offender of all here is number 6. Number 6, depending on the situation, could be considered incitement, and the person who said it could be jailed for it, rightly so. But it so happens that this sentence was said in a movie. That is a line from Full Metal Jacket, one of my favorite movies.
All fucking niggers must fucking hang.
Is the intent of this piece of art, of this movie, to be racist? Not against black people. It's a movie about the Vietnam War, and there are also a lot of racist epithets and slurs about Vietnamese people. And a lot of Vietnamese people were killed, so was the intent to incite hatred against Vietnamese? Not really. It doesn't seem so, because it's a movie about a war that actually existed. So the point here is not to incite hatred, it's simply to show how things were back in the Vietnam War on an American perspective. So of course there'll be a lot of Vietnamese being killed. There are also a lot of Americans being killed, because that's what happened in the war. So doesn't seem to be the case that the movie incites hatred against Vietnamese. But the movie does have a lot of racist language.
There is no racial bigotry here. I do not look down on niggers, kites, wops, or greasers. Here you are all equally worthless.
This type of language is very offensive, and these words often indicate that the person is a racist, homophobic, or etc. You can check my video about slurs to know what I mean. But when you're talking about a piece of art, when you're talking about a movie, a video game, or a stand-up comedy show, things are a little bit different.
Why the need for so much gruesome, graphic violence? Why not let us imagine
Because it's so much fun, Jan. Get
Really?
it?
Oh, really? Okay, I'd like to see you walk down the street and get attacked by some kids who've just seen your
Oh,
movie.
but you thought, but see, Jan, you're all messed up
Okay.
because you're talking about real life.
Oh,
and
I
I'm
see.
talking
And kids
about
at
the
12,
movies. You got to
kids
get
at
it
12.
straight. Now, if you want to talk about the movies, we'll talk about the movies.
Okay, and
If you
kids
want to
at
talk
12
about real
can
life,
tell
we'll
the
talk about real
difference.
life.
Kids
Now, it's very likely that if this movie was released in theaters today, it would be banned. It would be banned in most theaters because of the language that is used. And that is a big fucking shame, because this is a great movie. It's, my opinion, is the best war movie ever made. And I've seen a lot of war movies. That is the cost of hate speech legislation. The cost of trying to overly protect disadvantaged minorities. And that's why I abhor hate speech legislation, despite being member of several minorities myself. I mean, I am an immigrant from Latin America living in Australia. I am part of the LGBTQI plus asterisk community. I am an atheist. So I am part of several minorities, and I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people out there who maybe don't hate me yet, but as soon as they find out who I am and they know what I'm all about and they know what I stand for, they probably will hate me, and I can't do anything about it. And I really don't want the state to tell these people that they can't hate me, because when you're talking about hate speech, the bottom line here, what the state is doing is telling people that they shouldn't hate certain groups because these groups have been historically marginalized or etc. They are not allowed to be hated, and that is absurd. That is a gross offense to the values of a secular, free state. Now, you might argue that I'm misrepresenting here hate speech legislation. The hate speech legislation is not about telling people who they can or they cannot hate, but hate speech legislation is about inciting hatred. Inciting hatred is the same as saying that you hate. It's the same as expressing your feelings of hatred towards a group of people. And I agree with John Stuart Mill in his work in Liberty that restricting the expression of a thought, of an idea, is the same as restricting that idea itself. What is the point of having an opinion or having an idea if you're not allowed to say it? One of the most famous arguments pro-hate speech legislation is Karl Popper's argument that it is contradictory to allow hateful speech or speech that tries to silence others, that tries to take rights away from others to be said, to be uttered, and to be made public. If we live in a state that stands for freedom, that stands for equality and rights to all, any speech that tries to deny rights to some should be silenced because it is against the basic values of the state. However, the principle that allows you to stand for your values, that allows you to fight for what you believe, is the same that the one that allows those people to fight for what they believe. The thing is, if it wasn't for the principle of freedom of speech, we would have never made the social changes that we had made in the 20th century, especially after World War II, where most major changes have been made. And as a member of many minorities myself, I have been largely benefited by them. I think that when liberals defend this kind of legislation, they are shooting themselves in the foot. They lose all credibility to criticize others, to advocate, to take away freedoms of minorities, because they are taking away freedoms of a minority. People who believe those things, who have extreme ideas, who want to take away rights of gays, of racial minorities, they are themselves minorities these days. And you are telling them that they are not allowed to say what they want. You are imposing your will on this minority, and you lose all credibility when you say that they don't have the right to take away rights of others, when you are yourself taking away their rights. It's just a self-defeating position. What people seem to be missing here is that the principle is more important than the particulars. The principle of freedom of speech is more important than the speech that is being said. Most developed countries have hate speech legislation for 20, 30 years, and I think they have been in large part responsible for the rise in animosities between different groups of people, of a feeling of resentment by many who just feel they are not allowed to say what they want. They are not allowed to express how they feel. They feel they are being gagged by the state. And that is the consequence of using the hand of the state to tell people what they can or cannot say. Now, I think lawmakers had good intents when they created these laws. The problem is you are giving too much power to the state. And when you're giving this much power to the state, you are opening the possibility of a tyranny. Because, as Christopher Hitchens eloquently put,
who's going to decide? To whom do you award the right to decide which speech is harmful, or who is the harmful speaker, or to determine in advance what are the harmful consequences going to be that we know enough about in advance to prevent? To whom would you give this job? To whom you would delegate the task of deciding for you what you could read? To whom you would give the job of deciding for you, relieve you of the responsibility of hearing what you might have to hear? Do you know anyone? Hands up. Do you know anyone to whom you'd give this job? Does anyone have a nominee? You mean there's no one in Canada good enough to decide what I can read or hear? I had no idea.
Censorship is a hallmark of a tyranny. And what's going on in this case is a form of tyranny. It's a tyranny of opinion. Now, the tyranny of the majority is one of the main concerns of democracy. It's only natural to people to impose their opinions and their values on others. We all think that our values and our opinions are right. That everyone who disagree with our core values are bad people, are wrong. And that is fine, that is perfectly natural. Now that works for everybody. That is pretty much how we all are. And that, of course, will have the tendency of the majority to impose their values on others. And that's why the principle of freedom of speech is so important. That's why the principle that the state should never tell people what they should or shouldn't believe, what their opinion can or cannot be, it's so important, because it protects everyone, no matter what their opinions are, no matter what their values are, to be considered a criminal because of what they believe. I think it's pretty safe to say now that in the cultural wars, cultural liberalism has won over cultural conservatism. Developed countries are overwhelmingly liberal. If we look at our values and our laws now compared to our laws 100 years ago, it's arguably much more liberal now than it used to be. But not everyone is a liberal, and not everyone should be a liberal. There are people who are conservative, have conservative values. There are people who are extremely religious, or some are very conservative without being religious, and that's fine. The point is, not everyone subscribe to liberal values, or to most liberal values, and it's not up to the state to impose those values. Some right now might be accusing me of being misrepresenting and strawmanning hate speech legislation. They might say that I'm not really talking about the arguments put forward by Jeremy Waldron in his book The Harm in Hate Speech. That is probably the most articulate arguments I've seen for hate speech legislation. But I disagree with Waldron that he is actually advocating for hate speech legislation. I think he's advocating for something else. And that is the last point I want to make here, which is what hate speech is not. Hate speech is not defamation. A defamatory speech doesn't even have to be hateful. It's simply someone spreading lies and false information to harm someone else, to deliberately harm someone else. Now, that is not necessarily hateful. No, anything that might cause damage to someone's reputation is defamatory. It's completely different from hate speech. Incitement is not hate speech either. And incitement is something that needs to be very well understood, what incitement is. Now let's imagine the following example. Now there is a rally of people against gays, against same-sex marriage or whatever. And the speaker is advocating for a change in legislation that homosexuality or homosexual acts should be punished by the death penalty. Now there are quite a few people who still believe that. And they have the right to do it. That's not incitement. Now, that you might think it's hateful, you might think it's disgusting, you might think it's barbaric, and I would agree with all that, but it's not incitement. Now, people have the right, citizens have the right to advocate for whatever change in laws they want. It's different that if in a rally, the speaker is saying that whenever they see a gay person on the street, they should bash them or they should kill them. Now that person is inciting a crime. Now you might try to argue that that shouldn't be allowed to say because it's hate speech, but it's not the fact that the content of the speech is hateful that is the problem here. It's the fact that it's inciting people to commit crimes. And if there are another group of gay people making a counter-protest, which is something that often happens in this type of situation, that could lead to a horrible situation where those people could be attacked and bashed or even killed by this angry mob. And this is what incitement laws are about. It's about inciting other people, inciting a mob or inciting a group to attack another individual or another group of or another group of people. It's different than simply being hateful. Another thing that is not hate speech is harassment, and I think this is the main cause of problem with hate speech legislation and how it's often enforced. Jeremy Waldron, when he is arguing for hate speech legislation, he is usually arguing for harassment legislation. And that is a very important distinction. And I think that's where his argument mostly fails. Harassment and hate speech is not the same thing. Now, the content of a harassing act doesn't even have to be hateful. Someone can harass another without saying one hateful thing. It is the act that is the problem, not the content of what is being said. Now, someone might say hateful things while harassing another, but not necessarily. It's not the fact that the content is offensive. It's not the fact that what being said is hateful, but the fact that you are singling someone out and try to make them feel humiliated and hurt their dignity because of their life choices that don't concern you. Now, there is a very good real life example that happened in Brazil. Now, there was this transgender maths teacher that every day she had to go to her home. She would have to wait for her bus in front of a restaurant or whatever. And every day, the employees of that restaurant harassed her. Well, it was completely unprovoked. She was just going home. But because she is transgender, she was constantly being harassed by these employees. One day, she went to talk to one of them and asked them to stop, and she was actually assaulted, and that's when she started a lawsuit. And she won. She was given a financial reparation for the assault and for the harassment. But anyway, the point is, that person is simply going to her home and she has no choice. She can't just not go in front of the restaurant, not pass through the restaurant, because that's where she has to go to catch her bus to go home. After a day's work, she might be tired, stressed, and she has to deal with that shit. That is just wrong, and there should be a legal punishment for that. I think anyone who goes through that kind of shit should be allowed to sue those who are harassing them. Now, it's of course a misdemeanor. I don't think anyone should go to jail because of that, but a fine, I think it's very much appropriate. When it comes to internet harassment, I think it's often blown so much out of proportion. Most websites have block buttons. You can just block someone if they are harassing you. In very rare cases, there might be a mob of trolls that are stalking you and constantly harassing you and not leaving you alone, but that is very rare. In most cases, it's just one fucking idiot that you can either ignore or block. It's completely different than when you're out on the street and you are being harassed by someone who can physically hurt you. And that's what makes this crackdown on internet bullying and harassment completely unwarranted. It's not only a waste of resources. In the case of UK, for example, if you look at the numbers, it's absurd. It's not only a waste of resources, but it's also an invasion of people's privacies. No? People have the right to be fucking idiots. They do have that right. And unless you are causing someone that might have repercussions in the real world, and I'm not talking about a subjective psychological harm, but when you are humiliating someone on the street, for example, harassing someone on the street, that has repercussions on that person's reputation on the real world. That is completely different than when someone says something nasty to you on the internet. Finally, paraphrasing a quote wrongly attributed to one of my personal heroes, Voltaire, I would just like to say that I might disapprove whatever moronic, hateful opinion that you have, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And I really mean that. I stand by that. I think this is the most important value that we have in our society, and we need to keep it. And we need to fight against any attempt to take away that very fundamental freedom that we all enjoy. I've been Sarah Michel. Don't forget to write a comment down below, say what you think about the topic, give a feedback to this video. Don't forget to share this video if you like it, and especially share with those who you think will disagree, because they are the ones that really need to watch the most. And don't forget as well to subscribe to my channel if you like my content. That would be greatly appreciated. And thank you for staying with me until the end. And I will see you next time. Cheers.